Welcome to a place where stories are not just told, but lived again in the heart. This is where ordinary moments become extraordinary, where a stranger fixing a garden can awaken a fire long buried, where stolen glances turn into confessions, and confessions ignite nights that change everything. Here, love is not simple. It is raw, it is forbidden, it is healing. It's the kind of love that shatters walls, that breaks silence, that awakens desire when logic says resist. These are not tales of fairy tale perfection, but of souls colliding in the most unexpected ways, finding not just passion, but truth. If you've ever longed to feel seen, if you've ever believed love could fix what life has broken, you are in the right place. Stay with me, because the story you're about to hear is one you will never forget. What began as something ordinary had no reason to feel extraordinary. It was meant to be nothing more than a quick visit, a stranger's hands moving through the overgrown mess of tangled weeds and stubborn earth. The garden had been neglected for far too long, left to wither into something that looked more like a burden than a sanctuary. The call had been made out of necessity, not desire. But when he walked through the gate, something shifted in the air so subtly, so silently, that it was almost unnoticeable at first. He wasn't dressed like someone meant to impress. His clothes were plain, streaked with soil from work before this one, his shoes heavy with dust, his shirt clinging slightly from the sun's heat. Yet there was something in the way he moved, a kind of calm rhythm that drew the eyes before there was any chance to resist. His steps were slow but certain, like someone who belonged to the earth, who had learned to listen to its quiet instructions. When his hands reached for the tools, there was no hesitation, no wasted movement. Each action seemed deliberate, each gesture carrying a patience that spoke louder than words ever could. The sound of steel meeting soil, the scrape of roots being loosened, the steady thud of earth being turned. It was all strangely comforting, almost like music. Watching him work stirred something unexplainable, a sense that this was not just a man pulling weeds, but someone carrying strength in silence. And then there were his eyes. It wasn't just their color, though they caught the light in a way that seemed almost unreal. It was the way they looked at things, not with rush or irritation, but with attention, with care. When they lifted even briefly, meeting another's, there was a mixture of strength and gentleness, an unspoken reminder that tenderness could live in the same body as power. That look stayed longer than it should have, like an invisible touch across skin. At first, gratitude was the only natural response. Gratitude for the way the neglected corners of the garden began to transform, for the way heavy branches were cleared and stubborn vines removed. But as time moved, the gratitude deepened into something that felt heavier, something that pressed against the heart in ways difficult to explain. It wasn't just the garden he seemed to be fixing. It was the silence, the loneliness, the forgotten sense of being noticed. Even the smallest gestures carried weight. The way he lifted his hand to brush soil from his forehead, leaving a streak across his skin that he didn't care to wipe away. The way his breath grew heavier as he worked harder, chest rising and falling with a rhythm that felt almost intimate. The way his laugh came unexpectedly, soft and warm, when something resisted his strength for a moment. Each detail pulled closer, making it impossible to look away, impossible not to feel something shifting inside. There was no intention to search for connection in that moment. No thought of longing, no thought of desire, but it came anyway, quietly at first, then with a force that could no longer be denied. It was in the way silence between words felt alive instead of empty, in the way a glance lingered a fraction of a second too long, in the way air seemed to change with every step he took closer. It felt dangerous, the way an ordinary day could suddenly transform into the beginning of something life-altering. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't named, yet it pulsed beneath the surface like a current that couldn't be ignored. Watching him kneel in the soil, strong hands breaking apart the stubborn roots, it was impossible not to imagine what it would feel like if that strength touched more than earth, if that patience was poured into something more fragile than roots, something like a heart. And still nothing was said, only eyes meeting, only a breath caught in the throat, only a sense that something unexplainable had already begun. The garden was being cleared, but within, something else was blooming. Something that had nothing to do with plants and everything to do with him. It was supposed to be about the garden, but as the hours passed, it became clear. It was never just about the garden. The closeness began as something innocent, nothing more than the natural rhythm of two people moving in the same space. Hands reached for tools, sometimes at the same moment, fingers brushing without intention, but carrying a heat that lingered far longer than it should. That first accidental touch sent a pulse through the air, one that refused to fade. It was as if the skin remembered it, holding on even when the hands had already pulled away. The warmth of his laugh came next. It wasn't loud, but it was rich, the kind of sound that carried warmth into places that had been cold for too long. It was laughter that came easily, rising from somewhere deep, unforced and unpretending. Each time it broke the silence, it felt like sunlight piercing through clouds, lighting corners that had been dim for years. The air seemed different after it, lighter, charged with something that was more than just humor. There was the smell too, the mix of earth, grass, sweat, and skin. A scent that carried the rawness of life itself, reminding of something primal, something unpolished yet irresistible. It clung to him in a way that couldn't be ignored, pulling closer even when reason whispered to step back. Breathing it in stirred feelings that had been buried under years of control, feelings thought to be forgotten. Desire came quietly at first. A glance held too long, a brush of arms that should have meant nothing but carried everything. The way his voice lowered when he spoke, soft enough to feel more than just hear. Each small moment wove itself into something larger, something undeniable. It was no longer just the presence of a man working in a garden. It was the presence of someone who made the heart race, the skin ache, the breath shorten, and logic fought against it. Logic reminded of age, of rules, of the invisible walls that had been built to keep such longings locked away. Logic whispered that this was a line never meant to be crossed, but logic was powerless against the weight of what was happening. Each time he moved closer, each time his hand brushed against skin, each time his laughter filled the silence, logic grew quieter, weaker, until it was nothing more than a faint echo drowned out by the sound of desire. There was a moment when the nearness became unbearable. Passing a tool, his fingers closed around it at the exact second they were offered. The brief press of skin against skin was enough to send a shiver through the body, a tremor that reached deeper than just flesh. It wasn't just touch, it was fire, igniting something that had been waiting in silence for too long. Eyes met in that instant, holding each other with an intensity that said everything words could not. And then came the realization, the undeniable truth. Desire had awakened, and it could no longer be ignored. It was written in the way breaths quickened, in the way glances lingered, in the way the smallest moments carried weight far heavier than they should. It was no longer about tools or gardens or soil. It was about the heat that rose when he stood too close, the ache that lingered when he walked too far, the hunger that grew with every stolen glance. The body betrayed what the mind tried to hide. The pulse quickened, warmth spread beneath the skin. Every sense sharpened to catch the sound of his footsteps, the movement of his hands, the tone of his voice. It felt reckless, it felt dangerous, yet it also felt alive, more alive than anything had in years. Desire was not gentle. It was fierce, demanding, impatient. It whispered of what it would feel like to surrender, to close the distance, to let go of control and allow everything to unfold. It painted pictures in the mind of lips meeting, of hands holding not tools but skin, of nights where restraint no longer existed. And each time logic tried to silence those visions, his presence destroyed the attempt. Every moment in his closeness was a battle between resistance and surrender, between what was right and what was real. But deep inside, the decision had already been made. Desire had awakened, and no matter how tightly walls were held, they were already crumbling. The garden was alive again, yes, but so was something far more dangerous, far more beautiful, and once awakened, desire never sleeps again. It happened quietly, almost without warning, the way the heaviest truths often do. The sun was beginning to sink, its last light spilling gold across the edges of the garden, softening everything it touched. He paused from his work, leaning back on his heels, dirt still clinging to his hands. There was a silence between us, the kind of silence that carries weight, heavy and unspoken, pressing for something to be said. And then it came, his voice low, hesitant at first, as though he feared what the words might do once they were free. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished, it was raw, cracked open, filled with pieces of himself that he had clearly hidden away from the world. He spoke not of gardens or work or ordinary things, but of emptiness, of longing, of the quiet ache that comes from living unseen for too long. The words found me in places I didn't know were still tender, places that had been locked, guarded with walls built carefully over years of silence. Yet hearing him speak broke something inside, because it was like listening to my own secrets spoken aloud. The same loneliness, the same hunger for more, the same exhaustion from pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. For a long time, I said nothing. I only watched the way the light traced his face, the honesty in his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell with the courage it took to bear himself. Then, as though the words were no longer mine to hold back, they came spilling out. Not rehearsed, not safe, just truth. Every guarded thought, every confession buried beneath duty and silence, poured into the air between us. It felt like a dam breaking. Years of unspoken pain, longing, desire, all flooding out in words that trembled but did not stop. And he listened, his eyes locked on mine, steady and unflinching, not judging, not recoiling, simply receiving every piece of what was offered. In that moment, something happened that felt greater than confession. It was connection, the kind that strips away all pretense, leaving nothing but two souls laid bare in the fading light. The distance between us felt unbearable after that, not because of fear, but because honesty had pulled us too close to return to what we had been before. His hand reached first, slow and uncertain, brushing against mine with the kind of hesitation that holds both fear and need. The touch was soft, but it carried the weight of every word spoken, of every wall now fallen. I did not pull away, I couldn't. My fingers answered, curling into his, holding on as though that simple act could steady the storm raging inside, and it did. That touch was not just contact. It was recognition, it was comfort, it was fire. It spoke without words, I see you, I feel you, I want you. The garden around us faded into nothing but shapes and shadows as the sun lowered. What mattered was the heat of his hand, the closeness of his breath, the raw hunger that grew impossible to disguise. His thumb traced the back of my hand, tentative but deliberate, as though mapping a path he'd been waiting his whole life to walk. Confession turned into closeness, closeness turned into touch, and soon touch became something more. His hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair back, fingers lingering along the curve of my face. It was gentle, almost reverent, yet trembling with restraint. The look in his eyes was not just desire, though desire burned there. It was something deeper. It was the look of someone who had finally found what they didn't even know they were searching for. The first kiss came as naturally as breathing. No grand moment, no hesitation left. Just the undeniable pull of two people who had broken their silence and could no longer resist what truth demanded. His lips were warm, uncertain at first, then certain, then hungry. The kiss was not polite. It was years of longing finding its voice, a collision of restraint finally set free. Every wall that had once held back desire crumbled in that moment. Every reason, every rule, every voice of logic dissolved beneath the weight of what was happening. The garden that had been nothing but soil and roots became sacred ground, a place where two souls collided, desperate and tender, reckless and true. Each touch deepened the hunger, each breath carried the taste of surrender. Yet in the midst of raw desire, there was tenderness, hands lingering, lips pausing, hearts racing not only with passion, but with the aching sweetness of being seen. It was not only bodies colliding, it was the breaking of walls that had hidden hearts for too long. The fading sun gave way to night, shadows stretching across the earth, but neither of us cared. What mattered was the nearness, the heat, the confessions that no longer needed words. For the first time in years, there was no silence to guard, no walls to hide behind. There was only truth, spoken through every kiss, every touch, every trembling breath shared in the darkening garden. And in that truth, everything changed. It began with restraint, with looks that lingered but never crossed the boundary, with touches that pretended to be accidents but carried too much meaning to be ignored. The space between us was alive, humming with a tension that only grew sharper with every passing day. There was safety in the distance, in pretending it was nothing more than chance, but desire does not rest forever. It waits, it builds, and then it demands to be answered. That night came like a storm that had been gathering for too long. The garden was quiet, shadows stretching wide, the air heavy with the scent of earth and the memory of the confessions that had already broken through the silence. Nothing was said at first. The silence carried its own truth, deeper than words could ever reach. He stood close, not quite touching, but close enough that every part of me knew what was coming, and every part of me trembled with both fear and need. The first step was his, not bold, not reckless, but certain. A hand reaching, slow and steady, finding mine with the same surety as before. Fingers entwined, holding not just for comfort, but with a quiet urgency, as if letting go would mean losing something far too important. His touch was warm, firm, yet careful, like he was holding more than skin, like he was holding the trust that had taken so much to give. When our eyes met, the distance collapsed. There was no hiding, no pretending. Everything that had been stolen in glances, everything that had been whispered in silence, now came rushing forward with unstoppable force. His lips found mine, and the kiss carried the weight of everything we had held back. It was deep, hungry, trembling with passion, yet threaded with tenderness so powerful it broke me open from the inside. Breath became harder to find, but it no longer mattered. Each kiss only deepened the need. Each touch only demanded more. His hands framed my face as though memorizing it, his lips moving with a reverence that felt both desperate and careful. It was passion, yes, but it was more than passion. It was truth spoken without words, a confession sealed in every movement. The night wrapped around us, and the garden became something else entirely. It was no longer a place of soil and roots. It was a sanctuary, a space where broken pieces could be held together again, where wounds could be touched without fear, where hunger could finally be fed without shame. Every movement between us carried not just desire but meaning, every breath heavy with the truth we could no longer deny. The way he touched me was not the way of someone taking, it was the way of someone giving. Each brush of his hand, each press of his body, spoke of devotion, of care, of a longing not only to feel but to heal. I felt seen in a way I had forgotten was possible, touched not only on the skin but deep within, in places that had been aching silently for years. The rhythm between us grew stronger, bodies finding each other with a natural ease, as though we had always been meant to fit. And yet beneath the fire there was still gentleness, pauses where his forehead rested against mine, where his breath caught, where his eyes searched mine as if to ask silently if I was still with him. Each time the answer was yes. Each time the surrender grew deeper. It was not about losing control. It was about choosing to let go, to let love replace fear, to let desire replace silence, to let truth replace walls. In his arms, there was no need for guarding, no need for pretending. There was only raw honesty, spoken through skin and breath, and the pounding of two hearts beating as if they belonged to the same body. The night stretched endlessly, each moment flowing into the next until time itself seemed to dissolve. There was no past to carry, no future to fear, only the present, alive with fire and tenderness. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered sound carried the same truth. Love was not gone. It had only been waiting, and now it had been found again. When it was over, there was no emptiness, no regret. There was only stillness, the kind that follows a storm, when the air feels washed clean and the earth feels alive again. His arms held me as though they had always been meant to, strong and sure, yet filled with the gentleness that made me believe. It was never just passion. It was healing. It was being seen. It was love fixing what life had broken. And that is how two souls from the silence of a garden found truth in desire, confession, and surrender. Love is never just about passion. It is about being seen, about healing what time has wounded, about choosing to let go of fear and hold on to what is real. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can bloom even in the most unexpected places, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in the power of love, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Because every ending here is only the beginning of another love that waits to be told.